Today, I'm really excited about this topic and this presentation. We have spent the last couple months really digging deeper into this prospect of high-speed rail and specifically how transportation is impacting our local economy and how we can kind of dream bigger and have better options for folks getting around in not just the Pacific Northwest, but across the country. We have some very distinguished guests with us today. U.S. Senator Ron Wyden is joining us. Thank you, Senator, for being here. Keith Wilson is the advisory board member of the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association and president and CEO of Titan Freight Systems. And Andy Kunz is president and founder of U.S. High-Speed Rail Association. I really think that we have the opportunity to create some transformative change in our community and our state across the country. We know that President Biden campaigned on this idea of sparking the nation's next great passenger rail revolution. And so what does that mean? How could that impact us? And getting very specific to the Eugene community, what should we know and expect about that? So we're going to learn a lot more from the guests that we have today. I'm going to toss it over to Keith to do kind of a context setting and some information for you all. And then we'll toss it from there to Senator Wyden and opportunity for questions from the audience after that. And then Andy will kind of wrap it up with advocacy and the state of the current kind of political landscape and again, some more time for questions. So Keith, take it away.
Thank you. Brittany, quick tech check. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Eugene to Portland in 35 minutes. And I use the green and yellow to give a shout out to Senator Wyden and to the Eugene Chamber. I'm an Oregon State grad, so it pained me. I wanted to put orange and black. I didn't. It's important you know your audience. And so start strong. We at the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association are advocates for a 17,000-mile national network that brings our nation together. And we've envisioned this through phases or phase development. And I'm happy to report that the Cascadia in the upper left-hand corner is one of our key corridors to focus on in the first phase. To give some context as far as high-speed rail and its history, it began in Japan in 1964. But today in China, they have the largest network now at 31,000 kilometers, about 20,000 total miles. It is in 16 countries. It is in some of the smaller countries in the world. Morocco, with 0.5% of our GDP, has high-speed rail, and it's currently being developed in 20 additional countries. The United States is one of the last industrialized, certainly the largest countries without high-speed rail. A complete transportation system, while we advocate for high-speed rail, it really is interconnected with the two other segments, which are higher speed rail, commuter rails, and then the local light rail and the streetcar. All three are required. High-speed rail is that trunk line or the line that really makes it a transformative approach. Complete transportation system consists of a range of modes, all working together, each operating their most efficient segment. And this is a quick pictorial of that. But in the United States, the rail link is missing. And what we do is we're challenged and we overload our aviation and our road system. It creates delay, costs, congestion, and unfortunately, in the case of aviation, in a lot of cases, the shorter routes are unprofitable and they will use the longer routes to subsidize in the case. And the results is an overloaded system. Our road network at the top is failing, our aviation system at the bottom is failing, and the same congestion is happening in our skies that we see in those screenshots right there. It's just not sustainable. We cannot continue to build our way out of and or create more efficiency by building roads. It's essentially the hardening of our nation's artery, where our quality of life is not being improved, and more importantly, our economic activity is deteriorating the longer we allow this network to continue. And one of the factors of climate change is emissions and our transportation segment. In Oregon, our goal was to emit 51 million metric tons of carbon this year. In actuality, it's going to be 64 million metric tons, or 26% above our goal. And transportation is the largest segment and is the only segment that is continuing to grow. So essentially, we want to know, well, how did we get into this mess and how do we get out? And so when we look at our funding, we had an existential threat in the 50s of Cold War and nuclear war. We had to have a way of moving our population bases out of the city quickly. And the interstate system was built, and it was an extraordinary technology at the time. And we augmented that with our aviation system. And our federal funding is set up to really ensure that those two main modes are well funded and stay healthy. But you can see the amount of money we've spent in that time. The transformation is adding high-speed rail, but we're not funding it at the level we should at this point. And our existential threat today is climate change. Now, we haven't any high-speed rail that have been fully funded and operational in the United States. And so that's what we're advocating for, is when we look at the overall benefits at 22 grams per passenger mile, when compared to the other two modes, it's a tenth of the emissions. And more importantly, as far as our economic activity, our quality of life, we can move between Portland and Seattle in 1 hour versus the trip time it would take in the other two modes. So using some examples from around the world, China built out a large system quickly. And so we're able to look at some of the data and see how fast could we transform our nation using this technology. In China, the Shanghai or the Guangzhou province began operation, the high-speed rail network began operation in 2011. It created a 75% increase in rail passenger miles in 5 years. But on the flip side, it reduced road passenger miles by 26%. That was that huge change that we could envision in the Cascadia region as well. And as far as punctuality and being on time, the Renfe, for example, in Spain, if you're 15 minutes late, they will give you a 25% reduction in your trip fare. If the train is 30 minutes late, they'll give you a 50% reduction or a refund. If the train is 1 hour late, they'll give you a full refund. I travel between Portland and Seattle often, and I take Amtrak. And I would hazard a guess to say that I've been late by that hour by at least 50% of the trips. And so the goal is to really deliver on Rep. DeFazio's wish. If I could count on a train trip being under 2 hours and on time from Eugene to Portland, I would never fly that route or drive on I-5 again. And that's what we're able to deliver with high-speed rail. There are 4 major challenges we face as a nation. Energy. We rely on fracked oil and foreign oils. We become energy independent by really focusing our major transportation mode and flipping that switch over to high-speed rail. As far as climate, high-speed rail is one of the fastest, largest tools that we haven't used to decarbonize our transportation system. Safety. In Japan, since '64, they haven't lost one soul to high-speed rail. On the flip side, in the US, we're going to lose about 40,000 souls on our highways this year and every year until we change the way we move our souls. And congestion, Brittany and I were honored to do an op-ed for the Register Guard, and we focused on the congestion and how transformative that high-speed rail. In Eugene, we spend 150% more time on the road since 1993. And in Portland, one of the most congested cities in the nation, 250% more time in our commute. This is, again, we're able to get some great data off of the China. When they started in 2011, this is the economic growth that was experienced in that province. Shanghai, surprisingly, is the anchor of that high-speed rail, but you can see the growth rate is actually at the lowest. The real extraordinary part is that high-speed rail not only just builds growth throughout an economic center, but throughout the entire region. It decreases regional disparities. It spreads the wealth out over an entire region. It bridges the urban-rural divide by spreading that wealth out across a larger area. And it creates tens of thousands of affordable housing opportunities. And one of the things that drew me to this project primarily was the ability to add affordable housing to our smaller communities like Independence, Junction City, Silverton. And China's GDP now, with high-speed rail as an anchor, is on target to be the largest GDP in the world by 2028. In the Cascadia, we are ready to go. We have shovel-worthy projects that BC, Oregon, and Washington have already developed with community support and business support from the likes of Microsoft. And then what would the Cascadia bring to us? First of all, it's 200-mile-per-hour trains. We deliver people from Eugene to Portland in 35 minutes. It moves 20,000 passengers per hour, which is the equivalent of a 6-lane highway, reduces emissions by 6 million tons over 10 years. It's $42 billion to build, which is an extraordinary, but to build one lane north and south on the I-5, the estimate would be $108 billion. So it's a relative value. And then it would add $355 billion in economic activity to our area, making our region the 25th largest market in the world. And then to end, it would add this wonderful placemaking opportunity where imagine the central part of Eugene with transit-oriented design, having the rail keyed in there, building these dense, walkable communities that really weave our communities back together instead of being so road-centric. And so thank you so much for this opportunity to show our vision on how to build America back better. Brittany, thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith. I really appreciate it. And now we're honored to have Senator Ron Wyden here, who has been a great champion for infrastructure development and investments in our community, transportation included. And we're excited to kind of hear your perspective on the opportunity we have in front of us. Senator?
Brittany, thank you. And I'm sorry that I've got to be pretty quick because we're working on the first part of the infrastructure effort right now on the floor of the Senate. As the chairman of the Finance Committee, I'm very much involved in some of the issues that have got to be dealt with for us to move forward and get this out of the Senate. First of all, I want to commend Keith for all the work his organization has done. They have been there again and again on high-speed rail. And the whole idea of essentially going from Seattle to Eugene in a few hours and do it in a way that is cleaner, is in line with the Pacific Northwest quality of life would just be a huge, huge plus for our region. And let me just say that as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, along with Chairman Peter DeFazio, chairman in the House of the Transportation Committee, we feel very strongly that the Cascadia corridor should be at the front of the line for future development. And we all appreciate folks in other parts of the country, but the fact is the United States of transportation means that we're all in this together, and you don't leave behind particularly folks in the Pacific Northwest. The other point I wanted to mention, because Peter and I will really be zeroed in on these major investments in the context you all are talking about, the reconciliation bill, which will come up in the fall, is I want to mention clean energy, which Keith talked about. And the reality is clean energy and cleaning up the environment is sort of in our DNA in the Northwest, Keith. And the Senate Finance Committee, a couple of months ago, took the boldest steps for clean energy in more than 100 years of history for the committee. And what we did specifically, there are 44 separate tax breaks for energy on the federal tax books today. And we basically took those 44 breaks, most of which are sort of relics to yesteryear, and we put them in the dust bin of history. And instead of the 44, we substituted 3, one for clean energy, one for clean transportation, and one for energy efficiency. So all 3 of those, that trifecta, is ideally positioned for the great work that Keith is leading nationwide, and we're going to be pushing for in terms of the Cascadia corridor. And to put it in a sentence, what the Senate Finance Committee did, and it was really just a few weeks ago, is vote to take a system that really was sort of built around short-term cliffs. Sometimes the taxes had a shelf life shorter than a carton of eggs. So there was no predictability and no certainty. And now what the Finance Committee has voted for is a tech neutral, permanent, market-oriented system with a brand new lodestar, and that is reducing carbon emissions. And I'm very hopeful as we go into the fall that Americans can differ on aspects of this climate debate. They differ on some of the health impacts. They differ on some of the environmental impacts. What Americans come together on is reducing carbon emissions. They think that is an important focus that has been missing. You really move climate around two areas. One is taxes and one is prices. And we've been working on issues relating to carbon prices as well. So I'm very excited. Brittany, I probably can stay for a quick question, but then I'm going to have to get out the door. But I think what you're doing at home, particularly in the Valley, combined with the leadership of Keith and the good folks that are building out this high-speed rail nationwide, that's going to position us well for the battles in the fall.
Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate that. We do have a question in the Q&A that's pretty elaborate. It has a lot of pieces, particularly asking whether you support some of the amendments that are being offered to the infrastructure bill. I might, for the sake of time, Molly, I don't know if you could take that question and digest it and figure out like if we can get the answer out to somebody about some of those. I think that obviously reducing our carbon emissions is a valiant goal, and high-speed rail can do a lot to get us there. I think focusing specifically on high-speed rail and on transportation in general, I think that some of the best, most effective methods of addressing climate change are those that have multiple benefits to them, right? Because it doesn't mean that you're just sort of pinpointing this one thing that you're going to try to affect. And that's where I think high-speed rail is super interesting to the business community, to community members, because not only is it a good step in the right direction around climate, but it's going to help with, people who are dealing with housing affordability issues. It's going to help with people who are looking for job opportunities and wanting to be able to stay in the communities that they're at, but access more jobs. I think it's going to help with freight transportation as well, because it's sort of we have a bottle right now on our current freight system. If we're able to kind of separate passenger from freight, we're going to have more efficient freight travel as well. So there's a lot of benefits kind of wrapped around rail travel. And I think that in order to get people out of their cars, it's got to be appeasing. And 35 minutes to Portland, it's a pretty appeasing argument when you're talking about folks down here in Eugene. And back and forth. So I think it's a good area to focus a lot of attention, because I think we accomplish a lot of goals together in that way.
Well, Brittany, I'll only say you've summed it up, and I would just offer one more sentence. You can't really have big league quality of life and big league job creation with little league infrastructure. And if we look around the world at other countries and the massive investments they're making in areas like high-speed rail, this is about choices. The budgets you asked about, what are we doing with the infrastructure bill and then the bigger bill in the fall, reconciliation. I think people, when they hear about budgets, they get lost in all the small print and page after page, or no matter how they're getting their content. The reality is that's not what budgets are about. Budgets are about your priorities. Budgets are about where you make tough choices. And as Oregon's guy on the Finance Committee, and I'm the chairman and a senior member of the Budget Committee, I've got a chance working with people like Keith to re-engineer the country's priorities. I mean, people often ask me, hey, Ron, can we afford high-speed rail? And I'm telling them, you can't afford not to. for the reasons that you're talking about in terms of what it would mean for workers and families and their choices when it's possible to get up and down the Cascadia corridor from Seattle to Eugene in just a few hours.
Yeah, I want to recognize Representative Nancy Nathanson has joined us, and Nancy's been an incredible advocate for improved rail service and has spent a decade or more digging into this issue. And her and I had a great conversation yesterday talking about we've got to be really strategic in the way that we use the funds that we currently have. What we desperately need is more funds so we can be a lot more transformative as opposed to having to just be very strategic, right? And so I think that that's where, bringing you in, Senator and Congressman DeFazio are really going to help lead the way. And I see, Keith, you have maybe a question that you want to ask?
And then I'll have to zip. So whether the floor is Keith or Nancy in the parlance of the Senate, I will yield the floor to them. We'll do that, and then I'm going to have to zip.
Great.
You bet. And thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to have you representing Oregon. And Rep. Nathanson and Rep. DeFazio have been such proponents for the Cascadia. They were the two that have done the heavy lifting since 1990. So I almost feel like an interloper coming in so much later, but they are the experts. We know basically you're providing about $12 billion in the bipartisan. At least that's what we kind of see coming for high-speed rail. The Cascadia alone is going to be $42 billion. So we want to arm Nancy and Oregon to be, Rep. Nathanson and Oregon to really have the funds to build the best network so we can join the big leagues. How do you see reconciliation playing out? How do we really make a meaningful investment in that next truly transformative rail system that the president envisions?
Keith, what we do, and we hope to wrap up this phase of the transportation debate pretty quickly. As you know, the Speaker of the House has said that she's going to tie the bipartisan bill with the reconciliation bill. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out a sharp pencil to make sure that as these two bills interconnect in the fall, because that's what I've said. And by the way, the reconciliation bill is also going to have a heavy emphasis on areas like childcare, because if you make investments in infrastructure like the Cascadia corridor, it might mean that when a parent, goes on that 2-hour ride or something like that, they can tap an opportunity for a very exciting new job, a high-skill, high-wage job, if they have childcare at home, so that they can go and get on the train and be part of what we're talking about. So what I will do, and do it in conjunction with Peter, we'll keep you apprised every step of the way in the fall, as these two measures are kind of linked up. The question of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is being dealt with now, and the bigger reconciliation package in the fall. But I can tell you, we're going into this discussion. Peter is the chairman on the House side of the Transportation Committee, me as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, where we have the responsibility to fund priorities, saying this is just one of those areas where the Pacific Northwest is going to draw a line in the sand. And we're going to say this is a huge priority. And by the way, as you take out that wonderful map, we can talk about Senator Cantwell and Senator Murray, for example, two leading United States senators. Senator Cantwell, chairman of the Commerce Committee. Last time I looked, rail was part of commerce. All right.
Thank you so
Brittany,
much,
Keith.
Senator.
Thank you so much, sir.
All of you. We'll look forward to talking soon. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I am excited to introduce Andy, who is the president of the High Speed Rail Association and has been really monumental in the effort to get this on the national agenda. And Andy, I hope that we can give you a little time and and folks who are here attending, maybe this is your first time hearing about high-speed rail and the opportunities that we have, and maybe you have specific questions about the Cascadia line, which, you know, would ideally, and the reason that our chamber is involved in this conversation, we want to make sure that Eugene is included in the conversation about where that rail line might go if it does come to fruition. And we have a lot of interest in making sure that, you know, we have a large research university here. We have a strong economy in our community. We want that connected. But Andy, maybe you can lay out a little bit more information about the work that you're doing on the national level and how folks here locally can get involved if it is something they're interested in. Oh, I'm going to unmute you here.
I'm half on the phone and half on the Zoom with you, so sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can you hear me okay then?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, high-speed rail will, as Keith mentioned and Senator Wyden said both, it will be massively transformative in numerous different ways. And so this is something that we really need to get behind and fund in a big way so we can get these projects built quickly, that they don't take 20 years and 30 years. I mean, we see them around the world. They're built in 4 years or 5 years, you know, when you have support for them and funding in place for them and all that. So that's really what we need to advocate for. What it will do for the region is incredible. I mean, the studies have already shown the enormous economic benefits. It will literally create jobs throughout the economy, not just in construction, but it will stimulate tourism. It will stimulate real estate development. It will stimulate the idea of being able to relocate to a more affordable place, but to still have access to the great jobs in the hot job markets. Because the commutes, what might take an hour or two or more in a car, and is not predictable, on a train it's predictable, and it's usually only 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and it's clockwork every day. Those trains are on extremely tight schedules. That's how they operate all over the world. So these are the kind of systems that you can actually set your watch by and count on. And literally change your life around. Like I said, you can get jobs in different places, housing in different places. You have the opportunity to go for quick trips to concerts, to sporting events in other cities that would be normally too far away or take too long to get there by car. But by train, it's a quick trip. You go to an event, have dinner, visit friends, whatever, and come back the same evening on the train. And that's something that people can do on a regular basis. As far as what we're doing on the national level, we're pulling out all the stops every which way we can to literally make the case to all the key members of Congress why this is important for the country, how many of the objectives and things that we need that Biden has outlined and everybody else knows. We need jobs, we need economic development, we need climate solutions, we need new mobility. This touches all of them simultaneously. That's why we call it a silver bullet technology, because it's almost magical in how many different things it will do at the same time with a single investment. So we're pushing at the federal level for $205 billion out of these current bills for high-speed rail, and that would be enough to get the Cascadia project built and a few others, another big section of the California one built, and get a bunch of them started in places where they're only an idea to get them into the planning process. So, we have like 10 projects that we've called for to be moved into the planning process so that when the next pot of money comes in a couple of years, there'll be 10 more projects that are ready to go. And that's how we'll get the whole country moving on this. So, and we agree with Senator Wyden that the money shouldn't all go to the Northeast corridor. I mean, there's regions all over the country that need this and have the congestion issues and the unaffordable housing issues. And so that's why we're calling for bigger money so that we don't have to wait. That the Pacific Northwest should have high-speed rail just as soon as the Northeast, or just as soon as Texas or Chicago. And that's really why we need some much bigger money, because these projects, like I said, the Cascadia is going to cost about $42 billion, and we don't even have that much in the current bill. So, there's even enough to do one project in the current bill. So that's why we really want to, push for, and like I said, we push for $205 billion in high-speed rail money. the establishment of a rail trust fund so that then there's a place where money can be put each year and it's dedicated and available for projects ongoing. And then the establishment of a high-speed rail development agency or authority within USDOT to literally lead the charge on these. Right now, it's kind of up to the states to figure it out on their own, whereas with a highway project, you have USDOT leading the charge with engineering expertise, standards, and all that. And so we're calling for the same thing to be established for high-speed rail so that we actually have leadership on it that has a plan of action and schedules of projects and literally get a whole bunch of them moving at the same time. And then also we're calling for the robust labor standards and protections that are in the Moulton bill and a lot of the standard labor protections that exist in many of our situations today. We're calling for that to be included in this as well, because we want this to be good paying union jobs to build it, to operate it, and so that we rebuild the middle class and we have a really high quality workforce to handle this. So that's what we're doing on the federal level. Like we said, we're having a lot of effect. We've been at this now, a heavy campaign for about 2 months. We've had over 100 calls with member offices. We've been making the case. We've been holding press conferences, letters, many, many things, and we'd love to get more people involved so we can really push this over the finish line. And thank you all again for listening to us and having us on.
Thanks,
I'm happy
Andy.
to answer any questions as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think Keith has a little information that he can fill in, and then I have a couple questions for either of you or Allison or Molly as well.
That'd be great. Hey, Brittany, thank you so much. And I wanted to be quick to respect the Senator's time. A couple fill-in points is high-speed rail is one of those really extraordinary innovations that we need where we've stopped really investing as a nation. And this gives us that opportunity to really start investing back into our communities. Couple items for nuance. So I operate Titan Freight System in the Northwest. And so I have the ability and the benefit of visiting all the neighborhoods throughout the Northwest. And when I look to Medford and I'm beginning to lose accounts, now that's going to eventually affect our operations in Eugene and Portland. So Steve Rice was the owner of the Ashland Outdoor Store. And after 2 years of constant smoke in the summer, he couldn't sell fishing gear. And after 2 years of low or no snow in and on Mount Ashland, he couldn't sell ski gears and he went out of business. And when I called him, he said, well, I couldn't keep up with technology. And I was just saying, well, where's the why? And he says, Keith, it's just like with the smoke, people didn't want to come into my shop. And I can tell he was nervous to even say that the climate was part of the problem, because who wants to be that first guy to say, I couldn't operate because I couldn't get customers because of a change in our environment? I mean, who wants to be that first guy? But it's that profound change that's occurring. And when I go to Medford, there's rarely a summer I've been there now where I haven't had to hide in a hotel or trying to hide away from smoke. So it is upon us. And so we have to now act. And high-speed rail is that climate action that can make a profound change quickly. And now looking on the federal level, we really had high hopes for the bipartisan infrastructure program. It was really what Rep. DeFazio had worked so hard on in the House to provide that template. He had been working for years, and the bipartisan infrastructure framework that the president works on, he really explained, and we had a meeting with the administration on Monday. They said it was about preserving our democracy because it's been under threat this last many years. He had to move that through, and so we don't have the high-speed rail funding. We had hoped it was $12 billion. It'll do some great plans, but it won't build a network. So our focus right now is in reconciliation. And Brittany, you've been a wonderful advocate. Andy's done a great job, and the nation's really coming together to talk to really key stakeholders like Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley, that this is the time, and for us to move infrastructure without high-speed rail, we're going to lose another 10-year window before we absolutely realize we have to have this funding. And so, my appeal to everybody on the call and my appeal to everybody is really talk to your representatives, not only on the federal side, but on the state side. Rep. Nathanson, she is a stakeholder and an expert in this, and she and those key state level are critical to the federal level that are critical to get to the final funding and the outcomes. So we've got 90 days and it's all hands on deck, and we're really anxious to move this ball forward. So thank you for letting me really kind of fine tune and finish that, Brittany.
Yeah, of course. So a couple of questions just to kind of help set some context for folks. I think that when kind of the lay person like myself 3 or 4 months ago hears about this prospect of high-speed rail built across the U.S., those of us who've been privileged enough to travel to other countries and specifically in Europe and use their high-speed rail lines, it makes sense to me. I understand how critical that infrastructure is to everyone's daily lives in most kind of cities across the world, and we just don't have that infrastructure here in the United States. But I think it still feels like a pipe dream for a lot of folks, and I would love from your all's perspective to help us understand why is now different. Why is it not a pipe dream at this point? Why is this time right now in history like this critical moment where this might actually be in our hopeful near future?
I can answer that partially. I think one of the things that's been holding everybody back is this whole idea that we're still debating climate change. And that's been deliberately done by some industries that, spending money to cast confusion and keep everybody doubting, and so that we don't actually do anything. And I think now that's completely changed with Mother Nature actually entering the debate and having fires and floods and droughts and all this other stuff. You can no longer ignore the reality of this. And so that sort of was a big mover for us to get past this deer in the headlight confusion to now we need to do something. And I think that's actually sunk into our culture like pretty widespread now that, this is no longer the future and something we got to worry about later. This is here now, and we better get moving on it now, or we're going to have, fires every day in 5 years from now. It won't just be in the summer. I think that's probably one big thing that's changed. And then I think the COVID situation has revealed a lot of disparities and problems in our society, and some of it is related to climate, some of it's related to people not having access to medical care, transportation, housing, and all those kinds of things. And many of those people now are in the debate and are mobilized, and to the point where there's now major pressure to do some improvements and some changes. So I think, with a number of big factors like that changing, that we're literally entering a new era that now we're going to be moving on this. And I think the politicians and our leaders can know.
President Lincoln, who was a railway attorney, became president. And in the middle of trying to keep our union together while he was leading during the Civil War, to make sure our country didn't break apart, he knew that the way to unite us, and I'm using your words there, was to build the Transcontinental Railway. So he had these two major expenses and or challenges, but he moved forward. And that threat at that time was our nation breaking apart. We're here today, and there are a lot of people that think it's a pipe dream, and I get it all the time. And I listen, I talk, but then we can show examples from other nations how absolutely extraordinary this technology is. It only is until you ride one of these trains that you really understand, aha, it works. And that's why Andy, and that's why Senator Wyden were saying, we got to get one of these up and running. Just get it up and running. Once we get one or two people riding it, then people will understand. But it's just so hard to go, how am I going to operate without my car? So when you think about it, wouldn't it be great to just be able to take that 15-minute ride from Salem to downtown Portland, work, and then be home by 6 o'clock, and you live in an affordable home, in a wonderful community? It's a great opportunity, but we just got to get that first one built.
So I think the other thing I would add to that too is that everything big and transformative that we want to do, it's always a pipe dream until it's not. Until it goes from being an idea to the point where people actually make it real, and then all of a sudden it's real and it's no longer a pipe dream. So it's kind of, we've seen that with our highway system, we've seen it with aviation, we've seen it with many things in this country.
I want to encourage folks, if any attendees have questions, please feel free to put that in the chat, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can put that there and we'll have some staff kind of move that over to our Zoom chat. Another question I have is around, so specifically the Cascadia rail line, right? We're all, I believe, on this call located in the Eugene Springfield area. So there was a study done, state of Washington and in Oregon kind of put together a study that helped understand the economic impact and the viability of a Cascadia rail line. It went to Portland. The study didn't include a rail line that came down to Eugene. Talk to me about how do we, one, make sure that Eugene doesn't get left off this list, and what has that study been able to do as far as kind of helping us understand the economics of building high-speed rail? I mean, I think a lot of folks would say, well, why don't private companies do it if it's that economical? Obviously, public infrastructure is a necessity in this conversation. So yeah, I kind of want to have that conversation. One, how do we make sure Eugene doesn't get left off, and why do we need all this federal money to actually do it?
I can answer that. Eugene has always been part of our map. We've showed that since 2009, that Eugene is the southern end of the corridor. And eventually, we're also showing it will eventually keep going all the way down to California. So Eugene isn't even going to be the end of the line. It's going to be in the middle of the line. Once, the California system's finished, the Cascadia is finished, then the next piece will be connecting the two into one big system. And that's what we're seeing all over Europe. You can now take a train from the south of Spain all the way to Germany, or from, South Italy all the way across up into London. So, and these are enormous distances, 1,000 miles or more. Not everybody's taking it from one end to the other, but people are using it different. But it still requires somebody forking up $42 billion, for example, for the Cascadia project, and then waiting, 20, 30 years to recoup all that money back. That's very difficult for a private sector group to do that. So it's just like our highway system, our aviation system. It was all publicly funded to enable our economy to flow. And that's really how we see this. This is no different than highways. That, this should be fully funded by the federal government, built to the top world-class standards like we do our highways. And then private sector could run the trains, private sector could develop the stations, the real estate around the stations. There's lots of private participation involved in this that would be, more than welcome. I just don't think there's that many companies in the world that have deep enough pockets and that are willing to risk to do a bunch of these. We'll get a few of them built privately. We support that as well. But for us to get a really robust national network, we've got to have the federal government lead the charge.
And I can add some nuance to that. For example, Texas Central is under construction, and that's a privately finance operation. But the thing about that is it goes to the city outskirts, which is essentially what you don't want, because you don't want to have to be driving from the central area of Dallas to the outskirts to use a train. You want to be able to remove all forms of transportation that aren't public, right? You want to be able to get that main trunk to the center city to reduce any sort of criterion transportation, right? You want to really be able to plug into that infrastructure, whether it's e-mobility, a bus, a light rail, or whatever the case may be. Because it's so expensive, it's to the outskirts. That's where the federal funding comes in. They can help acquire the land, pay for it in a fair and appropriate manner, and get it to that core market. Private enterprises they don't have that ability, or they're going to do it in a circuitous manner that compromises that real fast train from point A to point B. And then you had mentioned Eugene. I could not see the Cascadia ending at Portland and getting the benefit that the Northwest needs in reduction of congestion and affordable housing. We need 20,000 housing units in Portland right now if we're going to house our souls. The same goes for Eugene. It's just not affordable anymore. To add Eugene in, it immediately allows us to distribute all of those affordable homes throughout the entire corridor, opening up the entire region to where we can have opportunities to live and work in this extremely great economic core, which is downtown Eugene and the economic core of downtown Portland. Yet we don't have to get into our car and spend an hour trying to drive 20 miles. I can't see Cascadia without Eugene. It is absolutely paramount to allow the entire economic region to work together. And it's the only way we tie all of our universities together, because it's about an innovation corridor. And the only way we get that is by drawing our entire community together. And that is something we can do with high-speed rail.
And see, ideally, you want the train to connect to the downtowns, to the airports, and any major institution like a big hospital complex, a sporting complex, a university, ideally, as long as they line up along. I mean, the train could waver a little bit to pick up some of those things, but that's the ideal rail planning that you want to do. So then all those people have direct access into the system. And then, of course, you expand the light rail systems to be a feeder into it, and then that expands the reach, into numerous other communities from a secondary rail system to the high speed.
Yeah, I don't know, Andy, if you saw the question in the chat from Zach, but you were kind of leading into that. He asked, other high-speed rail planning groups are working too. I recently saw the Atlanta to Raleigh corridor. The selected route bypassed many downtowns and proposed stops in suburban settings. How do we guarantee this massive infrastructure investment supports the city? And also, are high-speed rail plans concerned with in-city linkages to ensure that once you arrive, you can move around more easily?
Yeah, see, the thing is, it's cheaper to not bring it into the downtowns, but that doesn't make any sense for the long run. It might cost an extra $1 billion, because that's some of the most expensive piece to build would be tunneling underneath the downtown. But that, to me, is a necessary piece of this. We should not be trying to cut $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and then for the next 100 years, everyone's inconvenienced because the train isn't in the downtown. So it really makes the most sense to spend the extra money, tunnel right in, and have right in the downtown or right on the edge of downtown where people can walk to it. That's the ideal. And then you could even increase the density around the station with more infill development and more housing and all that. So I think that's something that we all just have to push for, and not let the rail planners cut corners and say, oh, we can save $1 billion by putting the station outside the town, or we can save another $1 billion by not going all the way into the airport. Those are foolish mistakes and foolish ways to save money, because it'll actually cut ridership. If there's too many steps and too many different things you got to transfer to a shuttle and something else, people are just going to say, forget it, I'm going to take a taxi or something.
And Brittany, there's a lot of individuals working and doing phenomenal work on high-speed rail in the absence of the federal government. And that's where we're at right now. We have so many wonderful people working with different plans to try and get it privately funded. And what Andy and I really are doing is we're working with the federal Congress and the administration on explaining that, we can't do this in an ad hoc fashion. We can't do it well. Our job is to simply get the funds in the bucket to allow us to do a really admirable job. And then, just like the federal benefit, it turns to the states, and then we let our state assemblies, our state representatives and senators, they are the experts for their communities and their neighborhoods, but to fully fund them to do the job right, to start strong, to finish strong. And that's kind of the real place we're in. I get a lot of questions, well, where are you going to put the station? And I really have to back up and say, our job is to build high-speed rail, but not to be the planner. We want the experts to really be focused on that. So,
yeah, I appreciate
that. See,
that.
that's the next step. That once there's funding and the project begins planning, that's the next step, is to start looking at exactly where the route's going to be, exactly where the stations are, because it's not easy to fit these in. You've got to do a lot of jiggering and figuring out. If we, like in California, they're actually having to move roads out of the way for the line to be put in the right place. So that's really the next step, is to dig into those kind of details.
Yeah, thank you. So we did have a question in the Q&A that was geared towards Senator Wyden. It sounds like, Molly, you can maybe help answer some of those questions.
Let's see if we can do this. So what I can do is I don't have the answers to those, but I will take them to Allison, who had to hop off,
Oh, good.
and the senator, and we'll get back to you all. But I did write them down, and yeah, can forward them on.
Yeah, so if the individual who submitted those wants to send me a note, I can make sure to get you the answers to those questions you just asked. We are just at time. I want to say thank you both so much. This is a really interesting conversation, and I feel like, to be honest, a lot of folks I probably don't know what's happening right now and don't know that there is this national conversation right now about the future of rail. I know that we have, like I said, a local advocate in Representative Nancy Nathanson, who's been working on improving the rail service that we do have right now, and getting, more consistent and reliable stops and more stops and more, options for us. This is complementary, I think, to those efforts, and really helps us really think bigger about what does it look like for the future, and long term, what's the best option for our country, and especially the Pacific Northwest. So appreciate both of you, Andy and Keith, your work on this nationally, and Molly for connecting Senator Wyden and making sure that he knows that there are advocates on the ground here in our community, in our state, who want to see this happen. Our chamber is interested because transportation and infrastructure is a business issue. It's critical to having a strong economy. And if this infrastructure is possible, we want to make sure that Eugene is not left off the conversation, and that we're using our resources and spending our federal resources wisely. So we appreciate all of you and everyone who attended. Thank you so much for your time. Again, a big thanks to OCCU for their sponsorship for this series. And we hope that if you have further questions, please feel free to send me an email, and I will make sure that we can get the experts to weigh in on those. So thank you all for your time, and have a lovely Thursday afternoon.
Standing. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you all very much.
Bye now.
Bye.